Welcome back to our special broadcast, Between the Holocaust and Israeli Independence, a conversation about liberty and identity. Katie, Caroline talked about the left having like an alternative religion. That religion a lot of times is actually, its temples are these international institutions, the UN, UNESCO, the World Health Organization, etc. Now, that is their kind of worship, the place of their worship. But the classic places of worship, the intellectual connection to the Bible, to nationalism, cultural nationalism, to the memory for the Jewish people, to the memory of the Holocaust, all that has been erased in Europe. If you go to Europe today, you speak to young Europeans, they don't know the Bible, and they think that you're talking silly witchcraft when you're talking the Bible. You talk to them about nationalism, all they hear is National Socialism. They think you're a Nazi because you want to have a strong Israel that defends itself. And you talk about the Holocaust, and they tell you that Israel is actually an oppressive, aggressive state that is itself perpetrating the Holocaust against others. So Caroline was talking about like this doublespeak, this 1984-ishness that's come onto the scene, and these alternative temples that humanity in places like Europe are worshiping at. Tell me what's the solution? Like, how do we get the Bible, nationalism, historical memory, heritage, liberty back into the fray, into the discussion? How do you, like, as a cultural warrior, get your message out?
Yes. Well, as a one-woman army, obviously, when I was last in Israel, that involved me stomping about, hunting down NGO reporters who were giving their own mythical version of the truth and actually facing them down in the street, in the place they call Palestine, and helping to expose the lies that they tell in this war against the memory and against the truth of Israel. So for me, that's about getting in people's faces and trying to show other people the duplicity of what is happening in our mainstream media. I think more globally, outside of myself going all one-woman army on everybody, it's so important that what we are doing is challenging what we're being told and helping others to do so. And I do that by going and getting other voices. So traveling around France, traveling around the UK, getting people to speak about what's actually happening to them. Jewish families who are being targeted in their own homes, who are warned, who are sent letters. 6 Jewish families in Paris sent letters telling them, get out or we will kill you. And the police, the French police, coming and saying, there's nothing we can do, you have to leave. I think part of the process of trying to wake people up is to show them the reality of daily life, of trying to be a Jewish mother, for example, in Paris right now, where every time your child goes to school, you're texting them to check they got there okay. Every time they leave for home, you're making sure they dress so that they can't be identified as Jewish, and you're checking that they've got home okay. You know, these are the truths of Europe, of my country, is that Jewish people are openly targeted on the streets, at school, and in their homes. And I think one of the most terrifying things for me at this today in the UK is that the organisation that's supposed to represent our Jewish families and friends, the Board of Deputies, are so closely allied with Muslim Council. They essentially do their bidding for them. And our own Jewish friends are being removed from the board of deputies for being Islamophobic. And that's what terrifies me. It's something David said earlier. It's a lack of willingness on the part of our brilliant Jewish community to stand up for itself, to speak its own truths, and to defend what you rightly stand for. My fear is that we will no longer have Jews in Europe within the next 20 to 30 years.
The good news, Katie, is that we're going to have Jews in the land of Israel. All right, we're going to be strong here. And I also, you know, when we saw what was happening in the UK at Brexit, when we saw your new prime minister, and we thought to ourselves, Boris Johnson, we thought to ourselves, great. And I don't know if I have rooted for the UK for a long time, you know, ever since some of those decrees, the white paper and limitations on you know, I was happy to root for England. I was happy to root for the UK.
And in brief, if I may, you know, that night, the 12th of December, 2019, I still get now, I've still got shivers. My hair on my arms goes up because that night, my Jewish friends in London, many of the mothers of the family, fathers, had their bags packed by the front door. And with the purpose that if Jeremy Corbyn got in, they were going to leave the next day to return or to travel to Israel to make a new place called home. And that was the truth of many families that night of that election. And one of the emotionally overwhelming things about Boris winning was that people who had voted Labour all of their lives, it was called the Red Wall, which is the colour of Labour in our country, the Red Wall, where their fathers' fathers voted Labour. They were miners, they were the working class, they always voted Labour. My father would roll in his grave if I voted anything else, that kind of place. They came out, and because they saw what it meant for our Jewish friends, and they saw what it meant for the persecution of people, they came out and they voted Conservative, they voted Boris Johnson because it was the right thing to do. So there's a reason you felt a connection with that election, strangely, for no reason. There was a reason, and it was something out there. This was the darkness of the left who would have persecuted our Jewish friends faster, harder. The anti-Semitism would have gone so fast, and it was the darkness versus the light, and the light won. So that's why you felt it too. I felt it incredibly, and my Jewish friends and families are much relieved.
I guess it's a new British finest hour. It was a very fine hour for England.
That's right.
At the same time, I do want to say to your friends, the Jewish people who had their bags packed, Israel is indeed a refuge, but that's not the only reason to come here. If you want to come here just to make a life and raise your children in Judea, there's an opportunity there. I'm not saying you have to run away from England, but if you want to choose a great destiny, there's definitely an opportunity here.
To be pioneers.
That's right, to be pioneers, to be part of a great and incredible project, which Israel is. But you know what, Katie, I really like what you said. It gave me a lot of hope because there's a lot of darkness out there. And you're like, you know, you pointed out that whole Corbyn victory, which I kind of forgot. And it made me feel like, yes, there are victories. There are moral victories out there, and they're incredible. And I'm going to turn to David Horowitz, and I'm going to riff off of that. David, you know, maybe you've felt a lot of victories in your long and illustrious career. I had a small victory, and that is that when UNESCO, the UN body that's in charge of recognizing heritage sites, decided that the tomb of the patriarchs and matriarchs in Hebron was actually a Palestinian heritage site. In Hebron, I started, in our offices, I started a campaign. At first, everybody told me I'm wasting my time. And that campaign started to snowball. And our foreign ministry got into it. Tzipi Chatabelli, our deputy foreign minister at the time. And then the World Jewish Congress, and so on and so forth. And at the end, it led to the Trump administration leaving UNESCO with the stated reason that UNESCO was trying to declare Hebron and the Tomb of the Patriarchs and Matriarchs a Palestinian World Heritage Site. Those lies were challenged by the Trump administration, and that was one of the greatest victories that I ever saw, that was in my life, a personal victory, a battle victory against the enemy that wanted to erase history. Like, tell me about victory. You told me before that you're disappointed in some of the things the Israeli government has done. Tell me about the next victory that we can have for Israel, for the world, for liberty, for America.
We can win the war, but not if we behave like mice. And that's the lesson of Trump. Trump, and unfortunately, Trump is still an incredible minority, and he's got a big following, which is the source of most of my optimism, that he's awakened patriotic Americans. But it's partly a characterological issue. I mean, both Jews and actual and decent Americans want to appear to be decent and tolerant and give people the benefit of the doubt. When we're faced with what the left likes to call an existential threat in the left and in the Democratic Party, what Carolyn said is very important. The assault on memory, and particularly on origins, is the sign of a genocide. It's to wipe out the people. You do it first by wiping out the images and the memories, and then it makes it easy to wipe them out. And in America, we have this genocidal campaign, totally embraced by the Democratic Party, sponsored by the New York Times and the Pulitzer Foundation in thousands of classrooms. It's called the 1619 Project. And literally, I'm not exaggerating anything, their goal is to replace the founding of America in 1776, which is the beacon of freedom, not only for America, but for the world, with the 1619, because there were 20 African slaves brought to the Virginia colony. That, it's two lies. The founding of America was 1776. Those were English colonies. They were not Americans. And the second lie is that slavery was actually outlawed in Virginia till the end of the 17th century. Those were indentured servants, so they would be freed in 7 years. And the vast majority of labor in Virginia was indentured servitude. White people were the main indentured servants. But you take away a nation's pride, its self-esteem. How did the United States bail out the world through 2 world wars from tyranny? It was because of 1776. How did they lead the world? How did Americans lead the world in abolishing slavery? It was because of 1776. If you take away the memory of the Jews and their persecutions, and you make their persecutors victims, you're just enabling a genocide. The left, they're Nazis. You can't hardly, the left has no shame about using that word, but why don't we use it at all? The home of anti-Semitism, the fountainhead of anti-Semitism is now the political left. The whole left in America hates Israel. But I don't see our side using the language of war. You see it? I mean, Trump is just great. I mean, what he's done. You had 3 presidents before him. It was Obama, Clinton, and Bush, all promised to move the American embassy to Jerusalem, which has been the capital of Judaism for thousands of years. Not one of them had the courage to do it because they didn't want to be called whatever the millions of horrible terms the left has. They don't want to be called racist. They didn't want to be called Islamophobes. Whatever the hell it was. The Temple Mount, that Al-Aqsa Mosque, that's a product of Islamic imperialism. Islam is a religion that was spread by the sword. We have to start talking reality, our side, and then we have a chance to win. And you have a window here with Trump, because I can't guarantee when he's gone, there'll be another fighter.
Powerful words indeed. And I guess you're really advocating using the language of war, understanding that it's a war.
Let's recognize it. This is a war. It's like.
Let me ask you this: why is it that the left likes and is ready to articulate and use the language of war, and the left and the right a lot of times recoils? Isn't the right more, deplorable? Isn't it more the people? Aren't we more like ready to fight?
more civilized, and it's too civilized for this kind of warfare. The left is exactly like the jihadists. Well, why are they willing to slaughter innocent people? It's to make the world a holy place for Allah. And what's the left? Why is the left willing to countenance these kind of crimes? Why do they avert their eyes from the realities of Palestinian terrorism and Palestinian Nazism? Because it gets in the way of their fantasy of establishing a world with social justice. They're total hypocrites. You got 1 million Uyghur Muslims in China in concentration camps. The left doesn't utter a peep about that. Their hypocrisy is on display every day in every way. It's like, I don't know, believe a pathological liar like Christine Blasey Ford, the accuser of Kavanaugh, Justice Kavanaugh, who was proven in the hearings to be a bald-faced liar. Believe her, but don't believe the accuser of Biden. I mean, I think it was Biden who, in his senile, I mean, it's the only endearing quality about him, that he's senile. He said, the Republicans have standards, but we have double standards.
Okay, it's been an awesome conversation so far. And I want to ask, I want to take this opportunity to get you guys to speak amongst yourselves. Really 3 superstars of cultural icons, people who are creating, just this conversation has awoken in me so many thoughts and memories and strength, and actually a lot of courage, and this feeling of willingness to fight for what's true and what's just. I want to turn it to you guys. Katie, come on, throw out something. What would you challenge David with when it comes to like Zionism in Israel or liberty and nationalism?
Oh, well, my challenge would be, and I place this to everybody as the non-Jewish representative here, representing all non-Jews, is why does, and I obviously mean this respectfully, but why does Israel do such a poor job of stating its truth on this as we look towards Independence Day, when moral clarity is one of the key values that you have? Why are more Jews not willing to stand up and speak the truth plainly and without softening it for the world to see? And I'm thinking of 2 things in particular. One of them, of course, being calling terrorism for what it is. And the second thing is the eternal conflict between Israel and whatever Palestine is. Why are so few Jews willing to be bold in calling this out?
Well, I think that there are 2 things that you have to bear in mind. I mean, one of them is that David was saying that the right wing is too afraid, or that the left wing is willing to castigate anybody and to use bellicose language against the right at every turn, and the right wing is much more genteel, much more polite. And I think that you have to recognize that the reason for that is because the left can get away with it. Mm-hmm. Left can slander anybody that it wants. It can say anything it wants to about anybody, and it doesn't matter if it's true or false, and there's no price to pay. There's no price to pay for slander. There's no price to pay for failure. There's no price to pay for anything. I mean, one of the things that was always extraordinary to me was how ghoulish all of these peace processors were in the State Department and in various, in Israel and in the United States. That they never went away. They failed over and over and over again, and they kept getting promoted. And same thing, by the way, with the media here in Israel and in the United States. You're a lousy cub reporter, but you're a radical leftist, you get promoted. You get promoted to a senior reporter, and you're terrible, and you're biased, and you lie, and just fake news comes out of your pen or your mouth in every broadcast and every article that you write, and you get promoted for it. There's no price to pay for lying. There's no price to pay for slander. There's no price to pay for misleading. And to the contrary, it's rewarded. So of course you're going to do more of it. And on the other hand, You know, so many people on the right, whether in Israel or in the United States or in Europe or in Britain or wherever, you know, they get prosecuted for telling the truth, or they get vilified and thrown out of the public square. So, I mean, that's the reason for stating the truth. You can get in a lot of trouble. I mean, just look at how many people have been deplatformed from social media. You know, I mean, all I do on my website, and I'm not much of a blogger, is post my articles from the paper. And Google AdSense deplatformed me. They won't allow me. Not that I was making, you know, maybe $5 a month, but that's not the point. The point is that they didn't want to be associated with me. Why? You know, and so it's everybody. And so I think that's the reason. And as for Jews themselves, now, you know, I think one of the big problems is the social pressure and the price that you have to pay. And the other reason is because a lot of Jews just don't know. I mean, if you're talking about Jews in the United States, if they're not raised in a religious or openly, very strongly Zionist home, where are they going to learn it? You know, you have Jewish day schools in places like Charlottesville that have been taken over by radical leftists, and people who are marching against Israel are also teaching Hebrew to your children. You have some of that. And then if they manage to get through grade school and high school in one piece, they go to college. And a nice Jewish girl or a nice Jewish boy who wants to learn about their history is going to go into Middle East studies. And take a class where they're going to be indoctrinated to and lectured to and badgered and hectored by their professor and by everybody in their university. And if they stand up for Israel, they're going to be banished from the public square. They're going to be criminalized and harassed by everybody. So why would they bother? And so I think, you know, that's one of the problems in the left. And by the way, it's also very much a problem here in Israel, where again, you know, the major television stations, the radio, many of the major papers are very, very biased towards the radical left in Israel, which is why people like the justices in the Supreme Court can get away with seizing power illegally in the name of the rule of law and democracy. So, you know, the only thing that you can do, and I say this to students here in Israel and in the United States when I speak to them, and I say really to any audience that I've spoken to, Jewish audiences, predominantly the audiences that I speak with, you know, you have to know your facts. I mean, like Yishai said at the beginning of our discussion this evening, that we're marking the centennial of the San Remo conference, and really more important than what happened there legally is what happened there diplomatically, because diplomatically you had the world powers assemble in Italy and recognize that the Jewish narrative isn't a narrative. It's just a simple, plain truth that the land of Israel belongs to the Jews, period. It's never belonged to anybody else. And it wasn't controversial. I mean, there was no question. It wasn't that they were great friends of the Jews. It was just that was true. They all knew because they read the Bible. But now if you don't teach your kids the Bible, you don't teach your kids the history of the Middle East in a real way, but you just teach them a lie, and you can't stand up for things that you don't even know, then you're faced with a fatal mix. So, you know, I think it's important. I just participated in an online conference yesterday about marking the centennial of the San Remo conference. And I said there was to students, and I urged them, you have to know this stuff. The more you know, the easier it is to defend yourself. The less you know, the less you can defend yourself. It's very simple. So I think, you know, you're not a one-woman army, and I'm not a one-woman army, and David isn't a one-man army. We're all fighters for the truth of our countries, the truth of our people, and the truth of history. And, you know, and so we can get as frustrated as we like, but it's an important battle, and I thank God that I'm privileged to be in it, and to be in it with you, and you know, with God's help, we'll win, and we won't win once and for all. I mean, our history teaches us that we'll win a battle, and then we'll be in a war again, and then we'll have to do it again and again and again and again and again. But since it's so important And since everything is always on the line, you just have to keep fighting and teach people so that they can keep fighting.
Well, thank you very much. I want to take it to a broader perspective. You're also one of the only Israeli journalists that have met leaders from Muslim and Arab countries. You even wrote a book about it. In English, I think it'll be Passing Every Border, La'avor Kol Gvul.
Yeah.
And you also referred to the Arab Spring. Do you think that the events in the Middle East have a significant impact on the return to nationalism in Central and Western Europe? Is it relevant? And if so, in what sense?
You asked a broader question. I'll try to give you a broader answer. We'll go back to the Middle East, don't worry, and to the Arab countries and the Arab leaders and the Arab people. But before that, you spoke about nationalism. And I believe that this corona crisis or corona challenge, you can call it the way you want, on the contrary, will bring us back to the return of nationalism, because people start to understand them. First of all, globalization, the danger of globalization. Second, I mean, with all those international instances that you cannot really count on. We have seen, for example, when Italy was bleeding, and Italy is part of NATO, and NATO wasn't here to cooperate. I mean, you would see countries, I mean, you need, for example, masks, but they can't even manufacture anything anymore. So they need to go to other countries and to further countries. I mean, you see the limits of globalization. And also you see that every country is, first of all, taking care of themselves. So I believe that worldwide, the tendency towards nationalism is will go bigger. Now you speak about the Middle East. The Middle East, it's a bit different, because in the Middle East, I mean, you spoke about me meeting Arab leaders, and I was also an ambassador in an Arab country for 4 years. And as a journalist, I've been like in most of Arabic countries. And the fact is that I would say that in many of the same Arab countries, still, and this is something that I regret a lot, and I saw it also as an ambassador in Mauritania, the important thing for you is your family, your caste, your neighborhood, your tribe. And on the contrary, I would say that if my neighbors will really take care of the people, but nationwide, then maybe they will understand that continuing in the path they're taking would bring them nowhere. On the contrary, if you really are concerned for your people, not for your family, not for your tribe, not for your caste, then you don't act the same way they did for the last decades. Now, where are we heading? I'll tell you what I think. I mean, during the Arab Spring, I was treated, I was almost, I'll say in brackets, of course, I was almost insulted, because I dare to say that we're not going towards democracy. And I know that very important worldwide organs were really, I mean, how would I say, we were so amazed by the democracy that we're going to have. But I could see, I'll give you an example, concrete example, Tahrir Square. I remember in Tahrir Square, so you had two places. I mean, you could either go in from the right-hand side, imagine, and there you have all those youngsters, liberal youngsters, and on the left-hand side, you had all the beards, if you want, the Islamic Brotherhood or the Salafist. So I prefer to go for the young ones, you know, those ones, democracy, the modern ones. And they had like a gate with chairs. They made like a gate. And I said, you know, I like to joke a lot, I must admit. I said, what is there, a duty free, or am I taking the plane? They wanted my passport. So I said, why do you want my passport? And they said, to make sure you're not Israeli. And I said to myself, I mean, people speaking about democracy, and still among the liberals over there, you would see the same speech, the same anti-Israeli speech again. I was really, really upset. And then when you go inside, you would see the way teenagers were treated. I mean, for example, there was this teenager kid with his parents and with his father, and dared to say something, and he got a slap. Ladies, I mean, the way they were treated, I don't have to tell you. So again, you're speaking to someone, I mean, who was 4 years ambassador in the Arab world, who traveled the Arab world so many times, who went to school in Jaffa. I mean, on the contrary, I am someone who loves people. I don't have anything against no one. Don't treat me when I say that as anti-Arabic, because this will be a joke. All my Arabic friends will laugh at you. But with all due respect, in order to be democratic and to be defined as democratic, you still have to pass, you still have some paths, some, how would I say, you still have a road in front of you. And I wish, I mean, this will go there. And what frustrates me a lot is you have a Middle East in the Arab Spring has shown you the limits of democracy with my neighbors, and all the world was clapping, wow, democracy, democracy. Israel, which is one of the biggest democracy I've ever seen in the world, not in the Middle East, and look at us, wow, we're not a democracy anymore. Oh my God, I mean, when they land in Israel, the liberals, the progressists, oh my God, they have the feelings they're in North Korea, and Tel Aviv looks like Pyongyang, or Jerusalem, of course. Tel Aviv is very democratic. So this is, I mean, you see how ridiculous they are. you see how would I say, I mean, how hypocrites, I mean, all this is, this speech. And this is so far from reality. But again, I mean, this is insane where they're going. But as I told you before, go out in the street and you will see that people think totally, totally different. And never forget, I mean, in life, you have to make the difference between noises and words. We conservative say words. The progressists, I didn't say liberals, the progressists, they make noise. This is the difference between us.
Wonderful. So I want to piggyback on that. And, we see that in many countries in the world, the United States, England, and certainly in Israel, there's often a significant gap between what you mentioned in the public discourse, between the citizens, and the content that is presented in the media and other outlets. What do you think? Has the role of the media changed from being the watchdog of democracy to the attack dog of democracy? Because it seems like the media is trying to hurt Israel. The media is vilifying Israel in Israel.
So first of all, I'll be the last one to attack media, as it's my profession ever since 1983. I said 1983 and not 1883. You speak to Bismuth and not to Bismarck. So I'm not that old yet. But look, concerning media, let me tell you about America. I love a lot of America. As an Israeli, of course, I'm very, when I became ambassador in Mauritania, first thing I did is call the American ambassador and told him how much I'm grateful as an Israeli to America. This is obvious. I mean, we love America. And when I land in America, and America had elections, you remember 2016, and the wrong guy for the how would I say, for the media has won the elections. I mean, they thought that this guy will be today the president, Mr. President, will be candidate, will be run round 2 rounds, and he won the elections. So show some respect, if not for him, at least for the people who voted for him. Now, every time I go to the States and I watch the news, as if there's nothing else than President Trump. That's the only thing. And in Israel, it's so the same. And let me tell you something. If, for example, in America, they say Fox News, and in Israel Hayom, thank God we exist. Try to imagine Fox News does not exist, Israel Hayom does not exist, and Mr. Netanyahu in Israel and Mr. Trump will not stay in power. What will they do? What will they talk about? They have to start working. They have really to start making a journalistic mission. To say the truth, I mean, what I was going to say is journalism is important. Criticism is important. I mean, you can't have journalism without criticism. But when you criticize everything, then you lose your reliability. And that's what's happening right now with media. And that's very dangerous because media is important. Because even people that we support make mistakes. Don't think that because we support this candidate or the other, they're Mr. Perfect. They know they themselves. And you have to make reproaches and you have to make critics. But if it's always wrong, let's leave Israel, go to America. Right now, there's the corona. At the beginning, Mr. Trump did not see the corona on time. By the way, if you look at media, they didn't see it even before him. So he didn't see it on time. Now you see the Democrat governors, how come he tells people to stay at home, go outside? If he would have go outside, they would stay out there. You want to kill people, stay. So the media right now is too biased and they exaggerate a little bit. Now concerning Israel, we'll go back to Israel, we'll cross the ocean and go back to Israel. I mean, with all due respect, in Israel Hayom, we have 5 rules, 5 commandments. We have 5 commandments. The Jewish people have 10, the readers have only 5. And the 5th commandment over there of the Israel Hayom is not to forget that we're Israeli. Now, as a journalist, when I covered, for example, the Kosovo War, I covered the Afghanistan War, the Iraq War, the Kosovo War. When I covered the Kosovo War, I remember that journalists from Italy were together, French were together. During the Iraq War, media put the flag of their own country. I mean, you're allowed, and this is where I'm heading to. Even media people, even me as a journalist, even me as an editor-in-chief, I am entitled, I am allowed to be patriotic. Yes, I admit, you want to accuse me of loving my country too much? Admit, I recognize. How many years in jail is it now for progressists if I love my flag and my country? Please tell me.
No. I think it's I love the way you speak about this idea of keeping fighting. And it's something I always feel for our side, whatever that is and whoever you are, is that our side, we always need to remember we will always be fighting uphill. So to your point about the left, all you have to do is say this, do this, and you'll be promoted probably. We know we will always be fighting uphill. There will never be a time when this fight is easy or gets easier. And any time that we think it do, we're kidding ourselves. And I think that's it. I think Yishai does a great job of it as well, standing boldly, knowing this fight will always be uphill, but we will prevail. You know, I do believe that at some point we will be able to feel that we are winning. I felt that way a few months back, actually, before Corona interrupted everything. I felt like we were winning, and maybe those two things are reconciled. I think the thing that's broken my heart a little bit here in lockdown in the UK is the willingness of neighbours to report on neighbours when requested by Corona police, and that casts to me a very dark time in our past, and now watching people willingly report on others to gain themselves favour is something I'm not enjoying here in terms of just bringing this round to today.
To Katie's question, is there something in the Jewish psychology that sometimes, like, you know, we're great super soldiers, we got amazing jets, we're great flyers, and when the chips are down, the IDF and the Mossad, etc., know how to kick ass. But when it comes to the narrative war, saying our thing, and there's something that sometimes Katie's saying, well, sometimes you're a little bit like mice, like you said. Is there something in the Jewish psychology? Carolyn said it's ignorance and it's a little bit of fear, not being promoted and not getting up there. By the way, I heard that Peter Beinart was a very unsuccessful writer until he started turning anti-Israel. He suddenly became mega successful. He just he's got lifted up. Go ahead, David.
Peter Beinart's hero was Joe Slovo, the Communist Party chief in South Africa, which is where he grew up. He's a bad player, bad actor. And yes, his book, he got a huge advance for a book that completely flopped. Well, we cannot win this battle until we start calling them by their right names. They're racists, they're Nazis, they support terrorists, they're hypocrites, and they're traitors to their country. Now, one thing that Marx showed, I mean, he started this international civil war, and they called their organizations the International. Remember, he said, workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains. And that proved to be totally wrong. When the First World War came along, the Socialist International held a conference, and they vowed that they would not fight for country, and the working class fought for country. And we can see in America today, the working class is going to fight for America. And I'm sure the majority of Israelis are still patriotic. We have to draw on that, but you can't draw on that unless you're willing to say, look, this is treason. Or, you know, that your Supreme Court is subverting your democracy, which is what it, you know, is what it is. I actually, I wanted, my magazine, we have a motto which says, inside every liberal is a totalitarian screaming to get out. Why is that? It's because they think they can change the whole world. They can create this heaven on earth. They want to control you and everything about you. That's why we're having this backlash in America over opening the society, because they're banning. Well, what did the Democrats do? They closed the churches and the synagogues on Easter and Passover and opened the jails. That's who they are. They support criminals. They support, anyway. This is the way the battle has to be fought. I have one parable that it's a Jewish parable. When I was in high school, I did a paper on the Warsaw Ghetto. And the ghetto had about 500,000 Jews there. And the Jewish Council, the reasonable Jews, we're going to be reasonable, we're going to cooperate with the Germans and show them that we're decent people. They took the census of the ghetto. They identified every one of those 500,000 Jews, which made it easy for the Nazis to ship them off to camps. And when people escaped from the camps, from Auschwitz, and came and told them, they didn't believe them. When there were only 1,500 Jews left in the ghetto out of 500,000, they resisted. It was the first armed resistance. And they held off the Germans longer than the French, longer than the French. If the Jews had fought during the Nazi period, there would be millions of people who perished in the Holocaust alive today. Every Jew has to internalize that story and start fighting. You know, this is just an early warning. All these things, the Iran deal, the embrace of the Democratic Party of Jew haters like Bernie Sanders. This is the early warning time. If you don't act now, what's going to happen is what happened with the virus. It's going to spread. We may not have a Trump. If the Democrats, I don't think they can win this election, although they're, openly trying to steal it now with their mail-in ballots scam, their voter fraud. If the Democrats were in power, Israel would be in a world of hurt, a world of hurt. I mean, Obama was just, there was still a better environment when Obama was elected. Obama is a communist traitor. He was raised the same way I was, only he never left the communist movement. He was trained by communists. He was part of the communist New Left that wanted to destroy America and Israel. But he was hemmed in because the national consciousness hadn't got to the point where it is now, where the whole left is openly supporting terrorists. On every campus, there's Students for Justice in Palestine, which is a Hamas operation, supported by every major university in the United States. And I mean, I've had this problem of, with the Israeli embassies, invited them to our events, and they would only come if I would take away those ads where I showed the 10 genocidal lies that were motivating Students for Justice in Palestine and Hamas. This has got to stop. People have got to fight. I mean, that's the message.
All right, Katie, so I guess your question evinced some very strong emotions because we do want to fight, and Israel wants to fight, and good people want to fight for liberty and for their culture and not have it taken over, just like you want to fight for an England that's not taken over by the jihad or Jeremy Corbyn, which is really two sides of the same coin. So I'm going to give you the final word on this, which is answer your own questions. Will the Jews fight for Israel? Will the world, the good people outside of London, win England over? Will the good folks, for example, who voted for President Trump, but who love America, who love patriotic America, will they be the victors? Will we be celebrating Israel in another 100 years for Israel, in another 28 years?
Yes, so two things. One, I want to put David in my pocket and then put him from time to time, just so he can do that kind of thing to people, because A, he makes me look moderate and reasonable, and B, we need that, I'm very alone here in the UK. I need that truth talker, and I need to be able to say, okay, ignore me if you hate me, listen to David. So that's number one. Number two, on a gloomy note, the UK will not endure. We will fall to Islam within the next 30 years. That will happen. And one of the things I learned during my following of Jewish families as they look to return or to be pioneers in Israel is that they have a place to call home. And for people like me, other families, we are looking to ask, where is our Israel? Where will we go? And increasingly, so I am so confident Israel will remain, will always be there, because when it comes to it, you are tough. The IDF is the toughest there is. You have this in your core that is your home, and you are not going to let anyone take it. And the other place I look to, of course, is to America, because there's a very different reaction going on right now. This virus is showing so clearly. Here in the UK, we are subjects. We are down on bended knee. This country is compliant. It's doing what it's told. It's not questioning anything. It's just accepting it's just a virus and we must do what we're told. In America, it's all about standing up and questioning, looking for freedom, reopen, rebirth, reborn the economy. It's completely different. And so it's to Israel and to America and that enduring partnership that I think we look to for strength. I think you guys have got it. We will go, but you guys absolutely will remain. And I believe in a more biblical sense, one day when we've retreated to Eastern Europe and other places, we will come back to Israel and to America, just as they used to do with the vines. You guys Americans came to us to get the vines to grow their grapes. And eventually we will come back to America and to Israel to rebirth our country one day when we crusade again. But certainly for me, America's relationship with Israel is something that has given me so much positivity and hope. And from a British perspective, we say thank you to Israel, thank you to 64 million Americans, and thank you for standing strong for our Judeo-Christian culture when, sadly, in my country, it will be left to fall.
Katie, we're not going to get to keep any of you physically in our pocket, but with this modern technology and this video, we're going to have this video to watch over and over again. I know that I'm going to get home and watch this video again just to be re-inspired, reinvigorated to fight for truth, to, as David said, kind of call it out more clearly and stop sissy-footing around and just saying with the truth more robustly, calling out bad things as I see them and as you see them. I'm going to take, Katie, from you a sense of that question, like, hey, Jews, when are you going to stand up and tell your truth and kind of not say what your who your land is, who your enemies are, and what your vision is for the future. And from Caroline, I'm going to take also this idea that education is the key, because there are so many good people who are simply ignorant. With all that, I want to wish you all a happy Israel Independence Day. 72 years and 100 years since the world actually recognized Jewish rights in the land of Israel. It's an amazing, amazing year. Yes, we're under the limitations of COVID, but our hearts are soaring. And I want to thank you so much for all the amazing work you do. Maybe I'll take the title of Caroline's book, which is Shackled Warrior, and say, you guys are unshackled warriors. I want to thank you for your amazing work, and thank you for joining me here today in Israel.
Thank you.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Yom Ha'atzmaut Sameach. Thank you.
I believe the Brits will rise again.
Now, hold on one second, friends.
I want to end on that. That's sad. I understand Britain is in great trouble. But let me, here's my pep talk. In April 1941, Gallup took a poll. Now, the Japanese had overrun all of Southeast Asia. The Germans had overrun all of Europe, except Britain. And Gallup took a poll among Americans. Should the United States get involved in the war? 81% said no. And then came Pearl Harbor. I've watched all these films of the Battle of Britain on the Smithsonian channel and so forth. I think the Brits have it in them to fight back. And unfortunately, it's going to take some major atrocity to turn them around. But you can count on that happening.
Yes. That's a good pet talk. I like it.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all the guests. There's a lot more great stuff found at Forum Cafe Shapira. And I want to wish everybody a happy 72nd Independence Day of the great state of Israel. Shalom.